In the distant future, on the lush, vibrant planet of Nalzareth, the air is thick with the sweet scent of exotic flowers and the song of countless birds. The Vulsarians, a peaceful, intelligent alien species with a striking resemblance to humans, have long since made contact with humanity and share their world. One such Vulsarian girl, Layla, lives among her people, her large, expressive eyes taking in the beauty of her surroundings as she wanders through the dense forests that surround their village. Layla is a curious and adventurous soul, often sneaking away from her family to explore the wonders of the forest. Today, her explorations lead her deeper into the heart of the woods than ever before. The further she goes, the more she feels as if she's discovering something new about herself and her world. The sun beats down through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor, and a gentle breeze rustles the leaves, carrying with it the distant calls of her people. As she follows a small stream, she hears a strange mechanical whirring sound coming from above. Looking up, she sees a small spacecraft plummeting toward the ground, smoke billowing from its engines. She gasps, realizing that it must be a human spacecraft, just like the ones she's heard stories about from her elders. As the ship crashes to the ground, she feels a mix of fear and fascination wash over her. Cautiously, she approaches the wreckage, her heart racing. The ship is badly damaged, the hatch torn open, revealing the interior. Inside, she sees a human boy, his features chalk white and his eyes fluttering shut. He's hurt, she realizes, and she must help him. Gently, she touches his shoulder, and he jolts awake with a gasp, staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Where am I?" he asks in heavily accented Vulsarian. Layla's heart skips a beat. She's never heard a human speak her language before. "You're on Nalzareth, the planet of the Vulsarians," she replies, trying to sound calm and reassuring. "My name is Layla. Are you hurt?" The human boy, Jake, nods, wincing in pain as he moves. I think so," he manages to say. Layla looks around, unsure of what to do. She knows that she must help Jake, but she also knows that her people will be searching for him. They must find a way off this strange world together before they are discovered. Taking a deep breath, she asks Jake, "Will you trust me to help you?" Jake looks into her large, trusting eyes and nods, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over him. "Yes," he whispers. "I trust you, Layla." Together, they begin to search the area for anything that might help them repair the damaged ship and find their way home. As they work, they grow closer, sharing stories about their lives on their respective worlds. Layla tells Jake about the Vulsarians' peaceful way of life and their close relationship with humanity. Jake, in turn, tells her about Earth and the humans' vast empire that stretches across the stars. The sun begins to set, painting the sky in a riot of colors as they work on the ship. As the stars begin to twinkle in the darkness above, they finally manage to get the engines online. With a tremendous roar, the ship rises into the air, lifting them both off the planet they've come to think of as home. The future awaits them, full of adventure and uncertainty, but with the knowledge that they'll face it together. As they work together to repair Jake's damaged spacecraft, Layla and Jake begin to share stories about their respective worlds. They discover that they have more in common than they ever could have imagined. Jake teaches Layla about Earth and human culture, while she introduces him to the beauty and wonders of the Vulsarian way of life. They grow closer, and Layla starts to develop feelings for Jake. However, she knows that their love is forbidden by both Vulsarian and human customs. The sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the lush forest surrounding the Vulsarian village where Layla and Jake are working on his spacecraft. As they take a break from their repairs, they sit side by side on a log, munching on fruits they've gathered from the trees. The air is filled with the sounds of insects and birdsong and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jake, still adjusting to the unfamiliar climate and vegetation, can't help but marvel at the beauty of their surroundings. "This planet is amazing, Layla," he says, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's like nothing I've ever seen before." Layla smiles shyly and nods in agreement. "Yes, it is beautiful here," she says, her emerald green eyes scanning the treetops. "But you should see our homeworld, Earth. It's a place of great beauty as well. There are vast oceans, endless plains, and towering mountains." As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor, they continue to share stories. Jake tells Layla about the different cultures on Earth, the various languages and customs. She, in turn, explains the Vulxarian way of life, their respect for nature, and their deep connection to the universe. They laugh together at shared jokes and experiences, growing ever closer as they learn about each other. Their hands brush against each other as they reach for fruit from the same branch, and for a moment they lock eyes. The air feels charged with an unspoken desire, and they both know that what they feel goes beyond friendship. But they also know that their love is forbidden. On Nalzareth, interspecies relationships are considered taboo, and on Earth, the cultural divide seems insurmountable. As the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, they finish repairing the spacecraft and climb inside. Jake starts the engines, and they wait for the countdown to launch. Layla looks at Jake, her heart aching with longing, but she knows that she must let him go. She reaches out and takes his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you for showing me Earth," she says softly, "and for being my friend. I will always carry the memories of our time together close to my heart." Tears well up in Jake's eyes as he squeezes her hand in return. "And I will always cherish the time we spent together," he says, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. "No matter how far apart we are or what happens, you will always be a part of me." With that, he lets go of her hand and takes his seat. The countdown begins, and with a deafening roar, the spacecraft lifts off, carrying Jake back to Earth. Layla watches until the ship disappears into the stars, a lump forming in her throat. She knows that she will never see him again, but she also knows that the memories they shared will remain with her forever. And deep down, she holds on to the hope that somehow, someday, they will find a way to be together across the vast expanse of space and time. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the verdant landscape of Vulxar. Layla lay curled up next to Jake, her small body pressed against his chest. She nestled her head into the crook of his arm, inhaling deeply the familiar scent of his skin. They had been like this for hours, unable to bring themselves to break the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Jake's chest rose and fell slowly with each breath, and Layla felt the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. She traced idle patterns on his skin with her fingertips, tracing the outline of his arm, his ribcage, the defined muscles of his back. She felt so safe and so content in this moment, as if nothing else in the universe existed beyond the bubble of their shared warmth. He shifted slightly, rolling over onto his side to face her. His eyes were still closed, but there was a softness to his features that told her he felt the same way she did. "I wish we didn't have to leave," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. "I wish I could stay here with you forever." Layla smiled up at him, running her fingers through his messy hair. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." She paused, searching for the right words. "Jake, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always remember this. I'll always love you." He opened his eyes then, meeting her gaze intently. There was a depth of emotion in his expression that made her heart ache. "Layla," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "I love you too, so much. You're the most amazing person I've ever met. And I promise you, I will find a way to come back for you. I'll make sure we're together no matter what it takes." She felt a tear trickle down her cheek as she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. Their kiss was tentative at first, then growing more urgent as they poured all of their feelings into it. Their bodies melted together, tangled limbs and pressed skin, as if they were one being sharing the same breath. As they pulled away from the kiss, they both realized that the sun was fully up now, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. It was time for Jake to leave, to return to his own world and face the life he'd left behind. Reluctantly, they sat up, gazing into each other's eyes one last time. "You're sure you want to do this?" Layla asked, her voice trembling. "You're sure you won't regret it?" He took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. I'm sure, Layla. I'm sure this is the right thing to do. But know that every moment I'm gone, every second I spend without you, will be a reminder of how much I love you, and I promise I'll find a way to come back for you. She nodded, trying to hold back the tears. Okay, she whispered. Then I guess this is goodbye. He leaned forward, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. His lips hovered just inches from hers, and for a moment they both thought he might change his mind. But then he pulled back, standing up and turning away. Layla watched as he walked slowly toward his ship, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Wait! She cried, springing to her feet and running after him. Jake, wait! She reached out, grabbing his hand. Don't leave me like this! He turned to face her, his eyes filled with regret. Layla, he began, his voice choked with emotion. I have to. I can't stay any longer. It's not fair to either of us. She knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. She clung to his hand, refusing to let go. Then take me with you, she said, her voice breaking. Please, Jake, I want to be with you. I want to see your world. I want to see what life is like on Earth. He looked at her, his expression torn. Layla, he began, I can't just take you there. Your people, your family, they need you. She pulled her hand from his grasp, stepping back. They've had me for 17 years, she said, her voice catching in her throat. Just one more day won't matter. Please, Jake, give me this. Let me have this one thing. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, as if he were trying to see into her soul. And then finally, he nodded. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Layla's heart leapt with joy as she threw her arms around him, squeezing him tightly. Thank you, she whispered into his ear. Thank you, Jake. I love you so much. He returned her embrace, his strength giving her courage, and then, with one last glance back at the world he was leaving behind, he led her toward his ship. They boarded, and as the hatch closed behind them, Layla knew that she was embarking on an adventure that would change her life forever. The ship lifted off the ground, and as they rose higher and higher, she watched the beautiful world of Volksar fade into the distance, the memory of Jake's touch and his words echoing in her heart. She knew that she was leaving everything she'd ever known behind, but she didn't care, because for the first time in her life, she was going where her heart truly belonged. And in the end, that was all that mattered. As the last rays of sunlight streamed through the lush forest canopy, Layla and Jake lay entwined, their hearts still racing from the passionate love they had just shared. The warmth of Jake's skin against hers, the gentle rhythm of his breath in her ear, and the lingering taste of his lips on hers were imprinted upon her senses, each memory a precious reminder of the night they would never forget. Layla nestled closer to Jake, savoring the feel of his strong arms wrapped around her. She traced her fingers along the defined muscles of his back, marveling at how different he was from the Volksarian males she had known all her life. There was a raw masculinity about him that made her feel both safe and terribly vulnerable at the same time. Jake's gaze drifted over Layla's body, taking in the curves that had felt so right beneath him. He longed to stay with her, to explore every inch of her, but he knew that he couldn't. He had a life back on Earth, a family who loved him, and a duty to protect them. Reluctantly, he rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow so that he could look down at her. I wish I didn't have to leave, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I wish I could stay here with you forever. Layla bit her lower lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. I wish the same thing, she whispered, reaching up to stroke his cheek. I love you, Jake. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a tender kiss before pulling back. I love you too, Layla. More than anything in the universe, but I have to go, for both our sakes. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. She sat up, drawing her knees to her chest, and wrapped her arms around them. Will you write to me when you get home? He nodded, reaching out to wipe the tears from her cheeks. Of course I will, every day, and I'll find a way to come back for you, Layla. I promise. The words seemed to break the dam inside her, and she buried her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. He held her tight, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort until her tears subsided. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "Will you remember this, Jake? Our night together? That I'm your girlfriend?" He smiled sadly. How could I ever forget? He leaned down, kissing her one last time before standing up and heading toward his ship. "I'll see you soon, Layla. I promise." She watched as he climbed into the ship, the rumble of the engines vibrating through the ground as it prepared for takeoff. With one final wave, he disappeared into the sky, leaving her alone in the forest once more. Layla stayed where she was for hours, long after the last glimmer of Jake's ship had faded from the night sky. She curled up on the blanket they had shared, clutching the pendant he had given her, feeling its warmth against her skin, trying to hold on to any trace of him. Eventually, she forced herself to stand, gathering up their belongings and the scattered remnants of their makeshift campfire. As she trudged back toward her village, her heart felt as though it were being slowly crushed by the weight of her loss. She knew that she could never go back to the carefree life she had known before meeting Jake. From now on, every waking moment would be filled with the ache of longing for him, the hope that one day they could be together again. When she finally arrived at her village, she was greeted with whispers and worried glances. Her parents met her at the entrance, their faces pale and drawn. "Where have you been, child?" her mother demanded. "You've been gone for hours." Layla's heart sank as she saw the fear in their eyes. I was just exploring," she lied, unable to bring herself to admit the truth. "I'm sorry if I worried you." Her parents exchanged glances, and Layla knew then that they had discovered her betrayal. They had found the hidden stash of human artifacts and food she had hidden away, proof of her illicit dealings with the humans. Her heart sank even further as she realized there was no way she could explain the truth to them. In the end, she never did. She spent the next few days in silent misery, her thoughts constantly returning to Jake and the night they had shared. She avoided her friends and family, unable to bear the pity and condemnation in their eyes, and when she finally mustered the courage to return to the spot where they had made love, she found that the grass had grown back, obscuring any trace that they had ever been there. Time passed, and Layla did her best to move on with her life. She threw herself into her studies, determined to prove herself worthy of the trust that her parents had once placed in her. But no matter how hard she tried, she could never forget Jake. His memory haunted her dreams, his voice whispering her name in the darkness, calling her back to the one perfect night they had shared. And then, one day, a message arrived from Jake. It had taken him months to find a way to contact her, and even then it had been a near impossible feat. But he had done it, and in his letter, he promised that he would find a way to come back for her. His love for her was the only thing that kept him going, he wrote, and he swore that someday they would be together again. Layla clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. It was enough to give her the strength to go on, to keep fighting against the impossible odds that stood between them. And so she did, spending the next several years waiting, hoping, and dreaming of the day when Jake's ship would once again appear in the sky, bearing him home to her. Finally, the day came. The skies over Layla's village filled with the sound of approaching engines, and she raced through the forest toward the landing site, her heart hammering in her chest. As the ship settled to the ground, the ramp lowered, and Jake stepped out, her breath caught in her throat. He was even more beautiful than she remembered, and her heart soared at the sight of him. He spotted her almost immediately, his eyes widening in disbelief and joy. He took off at a run, and she met him halfway, throwing her arms around him and holding him tight. They clung to each other for what felt like an eternity, their hearts racing and their breath mingling in the air. At last, they pulled apart, and Layla looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Not for a single day." He smiled down at her, his own eyes glistening. "And I never stopped loving you," he said, "even when I thought I'd lost you forever." They stood together, gazing into each other's eyes as the sounds of the forest and the village faded away, leaving them in their own private world. In that moment, nothing else mattered. They were together again, and nothing could tear them apart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a warm golden light, Layla leaned up onto her tiptoes and kissed Jake, sealing their love forever. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. They were each other's home.